We're going to start in this new series called Seasons. And man, I love series like this. How many of you love seasons? You just love like the seasons that we have, all of the different ones? You love that? I love that, but some of you may not. If I'm honest, my favorite season is summer when it's warm and I don't have to bundle up. But I'm gonna be really real. Like sometimes I like when fall hits because my wardrobe like doubles. Anybody else? Like you just have so many more clothes, and I think that's a result of living in Ohio my entire life. But anyways, I want to get into this tonight, and I just wonder how many people in this room this message is going to resonate with. As I was going and studying today, I just began to type some things that God had placed on my heart specifically for tonight, and I'm just excited to kind of share them with you. Have you ever been around a person that like they're just naturally just kind of sharp, kind of mean? Like you're like, what's wrong with you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, how you doing? Fine. Okay, like, hi, I think we've met before. I'm Josh. We probably have. You're just like, I'm sorry for existing. My goodness. Like, I'm sorry for breathing the same air. Like, what just happened? I was in a store recently, and they were pushing this cart out, this couple, they're pushing this cart out, and all of a sudden the alarm starts going off. It's like, beep, 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 and I'm just trying to walk out around them, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to like find but I couldn't because then the worker came up and she's like standing in the doorway too. So I have to just stand there and watch this whole thing go down. And so they're upset that she stopped them. And it's like, this makes no sense. The alarm went off. That's why she stopped you. That's her job. There's no need to be mad at her, but we just need to figure out what's going on. So then they finally get it all figured out. The alarm's still going off, but they just let them go because they're like, we've checked everything in the cart. Like, you're good. They get out to the parking lot and their friend is out there and they were just like, oh no, they didn't stop you, did they? And they go in, they're like angry. They're like just waiting for something to be angry about. You know these people? They're like waiting for something to be angry about. This person was waiting and she was like, they did not do that. They did not try to stop you. I'm thinking to myself as I'm walking to my car, like, the alarm went off. Like, did somebody do something to someone? No, like the alarm just went off. But have you ever noticed some people are just looking for something to be angry about? It just seems like some people are naturally just a little bit angry. And here's what I've noticed. Like, some people are angry like that, and that's one thing. But usually the people that have something going on with them, where they're dealing with something, where they're really dealing with something, like you usually can't even tell. Especially in an environment like this. Like, especially when we come into church, if we're honest, it's usually not people who are really deep down dealing with something. It's usually not those people who are like super brash, super upset. Sometimes it is, everybody responds differently. But here's what I've found. The majority of the time, the people to your right and to your left, they may be fighting battles that you have no idea about what they're actually going through. They may be fighting something and dealing with something that you would never recognize by just looking at face value. That's why here at the U, we believe it's so important to treat people the right way. How many of you agree with that? That it's important that we walk in love to people always. And I think it's so important because the person next to you might be fighting a battle that you don't know anything about, but man, your word of encouragement or whatever could mean the world to them. It could make a night and day difference. So here's what I found. Like, you have those extremes of like the mean, like brash, like what happened to you? But more often, it can be internal rather than external. That there's something going on. And here's what I found. I've been pastoring for about 10 years now. And here's what I found. That a lot of people are dealing with discouragement. A lot of people, and I would venture to say maybe even a lot of people in this room, you're dealing with discouragement. You're discouraged. In life, if you could define it, you're discouraged. And I think there's a couple reasons that we get discouraged. I think there's a couple reasons, if you're honest, that you and I will tend to get discouraged. The first reason is that you lack direction. You lack direction in your life. When you lack direction in your life, you get discouraged because your life doesn't have an aim. And whenever your life doesn't have an aim and it doesn't have a direction, it doesn't feel like it has a purpose. Even though we know that every person has a purpose, when your life lacks the direction that it needs, you start to feel like, man, I don't know if this life is worth it. Why? Because when you lack direction, you lack purpose. And I wonder how many people under the sound of my voice right now, maybe even watching online, I wonder how many of you are lacking direction. And it's an easy fix. The second reason that I've noticed that people get discouraged is because they're discontent. You could either A, lack direction in your current season of life, where you just don't really have an aim or something that you're moving towards, and that's making you feel like you don't have a purpose, or you can have discontentment. You can have discontentment in this current season. And I've found that discontentment can almost be just as big as lacking direction entirely, is having some direction, but being discontent with the current place, the current season, the current spot that you're in. And I love what Paul said in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. He said, I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And then this verse that sometimes we like to pull out and just quote it by itself. Then it says, Philippians 4:13, we all know it. Tim Tebow made it famous. Just kidding, Jesus did. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So here's what I'm gaining from this, that Paul's going ahead and saying, like, hey, here's what I've learned. I've learned that I can be content no matter what my circumstance, no matter what my situation. Why? Because greater is he who's in me. Like, I have the strength. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Like, sometimes we think about the mountains and the battles that we can fight because we can do all things, which that's true. But how many of you know that it's very true that being able to do all things through Christ who strengthens you, it includes, and a big part of that is being able to find contentment in every season of your life. See, here's the thing about contentment that I know to be true. Contentment isn't determined by circumstance. It just isn't. Contentment isn't just determined by circumstance. Contentment is always a choice. And we have to make a conscious choice to be content no matter what season we're in. I think one of the main reasons, one of the primary things that we can get caught up in that cause us to be discontent is when we make life all about us. One of the main reasons, I think, is when your life is all about you, that's the lowest form of life you can live, is it not? Like, when your life becomes all about you, because if your success is all about yourself, you'll never be satisfied. And I think that in our culture today, like, if we're really honest, like, there's this big sale on the American dream and what it actually is to be successful. But here's what I've found about in this kingdom. In the kingdom of God, success is defined differently. Success isn't defined by how high you climb the ladder, how many material things that you have, or what you possess. It's not defined by your position or your title. It's defined by how well you serve other people. It's defined by how well you serve him, I should say, which in turn will cause you to serve other people. See, success doesn't look like something selfish like our world makes it look. It actually looks like something selfless, not selfish. And see, I found that the key to truly be satisfied is to do his will and live in congruence with what he's called you to do. To go ahead and live a life that's all about other people. to live a life that's all about what he is in fact all about. So contentment, I want you to write this down. It isn't a place and it isn't a position. Contentment is a pursuit. It's what are you pursuing in your life? Or who are you pursuing in your life? Because there's a lot of things that we can pursue. If we're honest, there are a lot of things that can steal our attention and that we can go after and that we can pursue. But here's what I've found. The people that think that they're going to be satisfied when they achieve that success, when I get there, then I'll, whatever, fill in the blank. When I get that position, then I'll be happy. When I'm able to buy that house, when I'm able to drive that car, when I'm able to do this thing, when I can take this vacation, when I can just have all of the traveling once that I think that I need. If I can just travel around, then I would be happy. And in fact, maybe I could even travel around and find myself because I'm not really sure who I actually am. See, we put all these conditions on contentment and we make contentment seem like a place in the future. And here's what I found. People live in a perpetual state of discontentment because they think that contentment is something down the road, out here, something yet to be achieved. And they keep running and toiling and pushing and fighting and stressing out and clawing and trying to get there because contentment, it can't be here and now, but it's out there. And the target keeps moving. I think it's interesting that this is the culture we live in. And it's no wonder that we're overworked, that we're tired, that we're stressed out, that we feel burned out. That they say that our culture is the most overworked, our age demographic. This generation is the most overworked, stressed out, depressed, and just overall just exhausted. Lacking rest, lacking pace like never before. The pace that we've taken as a culture is a blistering pace of trying to get ahead so that we can make this thing happen. And I wonder, when does that ever stop? When does that itching and that need for more ever go away? When does that discontent with where we are ever leave us? And the answer is, unless we deal with it, it doesn't. Unless we make a conscious choice, it won't. See, I believe that the church in this regard was called to be countercultural. We weren't called to live the same toiling, lacking pace, stressed out, overwhelmed life of striving that everyone else is living. We weren't called to burn it at both ends for the rest of our lives until we're no longer really accomplishing nothing that really impacted anybody else but ourselves. That's not what we were meant for. See, I believe we were called to be countercultural. We were called to be able to find contentment in every season that God has called us to be in. We were called to be able to find contentment in the things that God has provided for that season. See, every single day of our lives is a chance to have this great relationship with God where He becomes our pace setter because He's our pursuit. He then leads our pace and He determines where we're headed. He pinpoints our focus towards something, and every day is an opportunity to just ask Him, what do you want me to do today? And walk stride in stride with Him. I love in the book of Matthew where Jesus made this statement. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And one translation actually says, "Come with me," or "Come to me, and I'll show you how to take a real rest. I'll show you the unforced rhythms of grace." See, our lives as followers of Jesus were meant to be lived as unforced rhythms of grace, not a constant grind. but yet we find it to be just a grind. How many of you, if you're honest with yourselves, and I'm not looking for a show of hands, I'm just looking for you to reflect in this moment, how many of you would say, man, my life doesn't feel like an unforced rhythm of grace. It feels more like a grind. Jesus gives us the answer, come to me. Come to me. Simple. Come to me, and I'll show you how to rest. I will show you how to rest. See, this is a message about purpose. But I found that we overemphasize purpose, and we want to hear, what am I going to do? 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 Big picture, big picture, big picture. And I want to bring it back down really practical. And say, before you ever think about purpose, let's bring it back to base level and let's talk about your pursuit. What are you pursuing most? Because what you're pursuing is vitally important. It's vitally important. The need for us to learn contentment. In fact, Paul was talking to Timothy was a young minister who served under Paul. And Paul said it this way. He said, godliness with contentment, it's great gain. What is he saying? Like, hey, doing things God's way and being content, it's great. It's great gain. I wonder how much of our discontentment, I wonder how many of us would find ourselves in a place where we're discontent because we've not really been the disciple of Jesus that we've been designed to be, because we've been chasing everything else, choosing to do things our way, when the one who actually created us for himself to be a disciple, designed us to live life in constant communion with him, constant fellowship with him, constant communication with him, and everything else to flow out of that. But we've become so consumed with everything else that almost the first thing to go is this. But that's what we were designed for. I wonder how many of us are discontent because we've become dysfunctional in our discipleship. We aren't actually disciples. We're doing everything our way instead of his way. See, from the basis of this, like when Jesus gave the disciples the Great Commission, right, that we're all supposed to be living to, that's supposed to be our mission of life, he said, go into all the world, and he didn't say make converts. What did he say? He said make disciples. Why? Because converting your life is awesome, but until you surrender your life, you're never going to be satisfied. See, I believe Jesus knew something. He was on the front lines of knowing something, that the key to our satisfaction is found in our surrender. That the key to our best life is actually going ahead and giving up and surrendering our lives to him in a full pursuit of him. It makes sense because God in Jeremiah 29:11, we all know the verse. It says, for I know the plans that I have for you, and they're plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Man, if God says, I know the plans that I have for you, and they're plans for good, and they're to give you a hope, man, don't you think if he has the plan, and we may not have the plan yet, don't you think that we'd pursue? It makes sense, right? To pursue the one with the plan. I love that in Psalm 136:16, it kind of echoes this. It says, you saw me before I was born. David is writing. It says, talking about God, it says, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. I love this because here's what this tells me, that God has a book, and that every day of my life, every day of your life was written in that book. That's pretty amazing. He already has the book. And here's what I've found. Some of you who are in the room right now, you might not be on the same page. Some of you aren't even in the same chapter. And some of you aren't even in the same book. And so it makes sense to me that if I'm maybe not on the right page, maybe not in the right chapter, maybe not even in the right book, but he has the plan and he has all the days written out, it would just make sense to me that he should be my sole pursuit. That everything that I have should be chasing after everything that he is, because once that happens, he can start to unveil his plan, his purpose, the great things that he has in store for me, to me. See, sometimes I think we glorify the purpose and we miss out on the pursuit. But if you're not pursuing the one who holds your purpose, the purpose doesn't really matter. Because you can walk your whole life and not be content, because life without Jesus is a life without contentment. Life without Jesus. See, we have Jesus, the only thing that can ever truly satisfy, the only person who can ever truly bring us joy. It's not the relationship that you think you need with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. I'm not coming down on that, but if you're looking for that to fill that void, you're asking them to do something they were never meant to do and can never do for you. However, when you have Jesus filling that void and he's making you whole as a person, you are complete in him, then you can go and you can add value to someone else's life in a dating relationship. But please, 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 don't try to find your validation, your satisfaction, or your identity in a dating relationship, because you are putting an unrealistic expectation on that person that's in the relationship with you to fill a void in you that they were never meant to fill. But this is what we see, whether it's a job, whether it's a relationship, regardless of what it is, we try to find things to fill voids that they can't fill. The only thing that can fill that void, Jesus. The only person who can choose, I'm gonna be content in every season. I'm not gonna wait for a season down in the distance, far off, to be content. The only person who can choose contentment is you. You choose contentment for yourself. You choose your direction, and you choose whether or not you're discontent. So I want to talk about really quickly, because I know I don't have that much time. I want to talk about just 4 things that I believe when you pursue, this is what it looks like. So what it looks like to pursue, I want you to write these things down. I think they're vitally important. I'm not going to go as deep into them as I could, because I think for sake of time, some of you probably have papers due. Some of you probably have work in the morning. I understand that. And so we'll go through these quickly. The first thing is simply this: what does it look like to pursue? Because we all can agree that if he has the plan, he has the book, he should be our pursuit. So the first thing is this: we need to practice his presence. In order to pursue, every single day for you should be an opportunity to practice his presence. See, I heard somebody once say it this way: every single morning when you wake up, it's an opportunity to report to headquarters. Say, God, what do you want me to do today? Who do you want me to reach today? Who do you want me to encourage today? Because sometimes we make walking with God and walking in purpose something that's grandiose, out into the distance, far off. But here's what I've found: when you're walking with God step by step, day by day, in the small things, it's a lot easier for him to lead you into the big things that he wants to take you to. But so few people want to start small. That's a whole nother message. Everybody thinks big. No, it's great. Dream big, think big, start small. Dream big, think big, start small. See, so few people are willing to start small. And that's the reason most people don't really get anywhere. Because they aren't willing to be faithful in the small things. They think that if it's God's, it has to be big, not realizing that if it's God's, and it's actually big. You know what I mean? They think it has to be big because it's God's, but it actually is big even if it seems small to you. That's what I'm trying to say. Even the thing that seems small to you, if it is God's and he's entrusted you to steward it, it is the biggest and best thing that you could do. Can I ask you, the thing that you're doing today that God's entrusted you with, if it were the last and most important thing you would ever do for God, would you still do it with all your heart? If the answer is no, then you might be missing out on the significance of the life that he's given you and the opportunity that you have to steward. Because you've got to be willing to start small, be faithful, be diligent with all of your heart. The only way that you're going to do that is if you have his perspective. What being in his presence day by day does is it changes my perspective. Changes my perspective on my current season, changes my perspective on my situation, changes my perspective on my coworkers, changes my perspective. The thing that you once deemed as small and insignificant, you realize is significant because it's God's and he's called you to steward it. I learned this back when I did housekeeping, and now we call it building ops, but I learned this picking up trash off of a hill. And some of you have heard the story. I wasn't planning to go into it, but I'll never forget. My job was make coffee for the staff here at the church. We were at a different building at the time, but make coffee for the staff. And then I would go out with my trash grabbers and the trash can, and I would walk down the hill, and I would pick up trash and put it in the thing. All the way down the hill, all the way back up the hill. Pick up the trash, put it in the thing. Put it in the thing. You get it. And so I'd pick it up, put it in, pick it up, put it in. And so I'll never forget this moment. I was having a pity party. I was upset. I had gone to Bible school for 2 years, and I was ready. I was ready to do something big, right? I was ready to I knew, I am called to pastoral ministry, and that is what I need to be doing. I knew just enough to get myself in trouble, And so I felt gosh, I didn't go 1,000 miles away and come back to pick up trash. God, surely you have more for me than this. You told me to come back here and serve. I didn't know that was gonna look like this. Seriously? Do you hear me? How we go through those seasons, we're here God, do you hear me? And he's like, yes, you idiot, I hear you. You know what I mean? God never calls us an idiot. That was me. I called you an idiot, but sorry. But yes, I hear you. And so anyways, I was picking up trash. And wouldn't you know it, because I had a bad attitude this day and was just having a little pity party, you can't make this up. There was a landscaping truck that drove down this hill. The dude rolled down his window and yells out the window, "You're nothing but a beep community service worker." And so then he drives by and he's still cussing me out. I'm like, see? God, this is exactly what I was talking about. That's humiliating. It was a season where I needed to actually, it wasn't humiliating, I needed to actually humble myself. I remember God speaking to my heart and saying, until you treat this with the same enthusiasm that you would the office that you think you want, you'll never be there. And I remember in that moment, there was a heart adjustment that took place where I decided, you know what, this is God's. This is an opportunity that he's called me to steward. I'm gonna steward it with all my heart. I'm gonna thank him for it every morning. And I began to listen to stuff, feed on stuff about thankfulness, about being thankful, developing a thankful spirit. Can I encourage you in the season you're in, if you'll practice the presence of God, one of the things that it'll do within you is produce a thankful spirit. You need to wake up every morning and say, God, I thank you that I'm alive, that I have breath in my lungs, and that you wanna use me right here, right now, in the season that I'm in the job that I'm in, even if I don't like it that much. I thank you that I have a job. And I thank you that you want to use me at it. And I thank you that you've got a purpose for me. And I thank you that this isn't the end for me, but God, you're going to use me mightily because I'm not going to overlook this season. I'm going to embrace this season. I'm going to embrace this season. I'm going to do everything that you have for me right here, right now. There's something special to that. You won't believe this. I'm telling this story one time when I'm preaching in one of our main worship experiences, and the guy that drove the truck, you can't make this up. I had told the story 2 months before. I'm standing in the foyer at Love is Red, and the guy walks up to me, and he's like, Pastor Josh, and he's sweating it. I can tell he's mustered it up to come up to me. It's Pastor Josh, he's wiping his face and I just don't even know how to say this. You remember that story you told about the guy that rolled down his window and yelled those things at you? It was me. I yelled those things at you. And I want you to know that my life, it went down. I hit rock bottom. He's like, but I should have never said those things to you. But now, he's like, I've given my life to Jesus. And now, God's actually using you, and I just want you to know this. He used you, and he's used some of your messages to minister to me. So if that's a confirmation to you, our God's amazing, is he not? Because he's like, I'm on my way back up because of this church. I'm on my way back up. And I'm experiencing God for the first time. I thought, how amazing is our God that, man, he totally flips the script. But too often we want to get way far ahead of him and we think, oh, I have this dream. Oh, well, I was further along when I was at this place. I could have been further had I stayed there, rather than the place that he called you. But you're right where he wants you. Can I tell you, if he's called you to be there, it's the best place you can be, even if you feel like you're held back. Maybe it's not that you're buried. Maybe it's that you're planted, and things that are planted, they grow, but they don't just grow on the surface. They grow beneath the surface so that they have the strength and the wherewithal to withstand seasons. Can I tell you that every preparation season that I had, I'm getting ahead of myself, every preparation season that I had prepared me to withstand some of the things that I have to withstand now. It built something in me. It built character. My roots grew down deep. I had to dig my toes in and I had to get planted, and what grew deep didn't come on the surface for a really long time. The second thing is align my priorities. Align my priorities. I have to align my priorities. If I'm going to truly pursue, then I have to align my priorities. And I want to encourage you that alignment, it always precedes assignment. Alignment always precedes assignment. So what does it look like to align your priorities? When you're pursuing God, you're aligning your priorities. Here's what that looks like. It looks like if Jesus said, I'm building my church, then you become a part of building his church. Because you want to be a part. If you're pursuing him, then you're going to be about building what he's building. So can I encourage you, like if you're not involved in church and God's called you to this church, get involved. It's one of the best things I ever did. Not saying that because I'm a pastor. I'd be involved if I weren't a pastor. Was involved when I wasn't a pastor. It builds something in you. Being involved here will make you better. I know business guys who are very successful in business now, and they'd attribute it to being involved in the local church. Why? Because there's just something about it. There's just something supernatural that God does in and through your life when you're planted in a local church. Another thing is, like, we talked about practicing his presence, but like, how about honoring the word? Like when you're practicing your presence, you're realigning his priorities. Can I ask you, what do your priorities look like right now? And do they look like what God said should be priorities in his word? Because if there's a gap, then you may have an area where you can realign, because it's not hard. It's just a heart adjustment to say, God, I'm going to realign my priorities because I'm all about your assignment for my life. I want to realign my priorities. The third thing is simply this: to embrace his pace. This is a big one. Embrace his pace. I put it this way: there's grace when we embrace his pace. What does that mean? Sometimes the pace that I want to go at, the pace that you want to go at, is way faster than the pace that God actually has us on. Sometimes we want to do way more because, can I tell you, there are a lot of good ideas out there on what you could do. There are a lot of good ideas out there on what you could be using your time for. One of the things that challenges me and helps me to take a litmus test, if you will, of what I'm doing is, how many things have I added to my plate or added to what I'm doing that God never asked me to in the first place? I wouldn't know that if I didn't pursue his presence And I wouldn't know that if I didn't align my priorities. But once I do those two things, then it becomes pretty obvious. If my pace is off, here's the deal, because my pace has been off before. And some of you can probably say, my pace has been off. Like, my pace has been off, if I'm just honest with you. And it's never been God's fault. It's always been something that I added that I wasn't supposed to, or something that I didn't balance that he was dealing with me to balance. It's never been on him. But when we embrace his pace, guess what happens? That's when you hit those unforced rhythms of grace, where it's like, man, I'm graced. I am graced for this. Like, I'm graced for this. I had somebody come up to me recently. We were doing lunch. And they're, doing their thing. They've got like this, they're going around and speaking all the time. And they've got this podcast that they're starting. And the question was like, hey, will you come on my podcast? And I was like, why? Like, why do you want me to come on your podcast? That's why. And they're like, you know what? Why don't you start a podcast? Why don't you do some this, and why don't you start a YouTube, and why don't you do this and this? And they have all these good ideas, but I've never been after good ideas. I want God ideas. If it's not his idea, I don't want any part of it. What is my calling? I know what my calling is. My calling is to serve the house, whatever that looks like. So I don't need all that extra stuff. See, some people spend so much of their time trying to strive so that they can arrive. And I don't know what arrival is, but I feel bad for people who are trying to get there, because I have a feeling it's a never-ending cycle of discontentment. Are you willing to embrace his pace, even when it causes you to be patient in seasons that you don't really want to wait, but God's telling you to wait? The fourth thing, we'll move on from that was going over big, is trust the process. Trust the process. See, the process of preparation, it doesn't have to be painful. You and I, we choose whether it's painful, but it is always profitable. Here's what I'll tell you. Every season of preparation in my life has prepared me for the next season that God had for my life. But I couldn't see it while it was happening. I had to just trust him. Trusting the process has everything to do with having faith that God knows you better than you know yourself, and that he has the book and that he has the plan. And so my job is just to trust and take a step of obedience, and trust and take another step of obedience. That is my job. Doesn't matter if the pace is as fast as I think it is. Doesn't matter if it's too fast. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if the preparation doesn't seem like something I really want to do. If I'm really honest, preparation has never felt like something that I wanted to do. But it's always been something that when I get in his presence and I align my priorities and I start to be like, God, I'm going to embrace your pace for my life for this season, that I understand that he's in. And that when I understand that he's in it, I don't have to really be like, oh man, I don't think anybody goes into preparation. I don't think anybody picks up trash on a hill being like, man, I was so excited to do this before I started. It was all in shifting your perspective, because there's somebody who has a higher perspective than what you do of your life. There's somebody that has a bird's eye view. Have you ever noticed when you're on a roof of a tall building, how much and how far you can see? How much it does for your perspective? It's but if you just walked out onto the street where that building is, you wouldn't nearly have that view of how big and vast the city is. But God has that on top of the building view of our lives, where he sees the big picture. He sees the whole picture. He sees it all. He knows the beginning from the end. And he's worthy of our trust. So we can just rest and we can just trust. How many of you know trust is a rest? Some of you are like, I don't have any rest. No, you don't have any faith. If you start to trust that God knows you better than you know yourself, and you're doing these things, and you're in this process of preparation that you don't like, all you have to do is shift your perspective and say, God, you know what? I trust you. I trust you with this. I'm going to do this with all of my heart. The Bible says, do everything that you do for the glory of God. Do everything as unto the Lord. When you start to take that approach, man, it changes your whole view of everything. Once your perspective changes, all of a sudden, like that job that you used to go into that you thought was like kind of a dead-end job, why am I here? Been here for like 3 years. I haven't gotten a raise. Don't want to be here. You start to see like, man, God, you have me here. You've divinely placed me here to reach people. There are people who are far from you. I think it's amazing what can happen. We're willing to practice his presence. We're willing to align our priorities, embrace his pace, trust the process, knowing, man, God, you've got the plan. I don't have to lack direction. I can just take the last step that you told me to take and know that that's enough. Some of you are like, God, I haven't heard anything from you in a while. What was the last step he asked you to take? Did you take it? All you have to do is be obedient to take steps, and God figures out the rest. He's already got it figured out. And that's the key. Trusting, obeying, taking steps, that's the key to not just living a life of success, but living a life of significance that will actually satisfy your soul. You won't have to deal with the discontentment that this world deals with because you know, man, God, I'm in the center of your will. I'm doing exactly what you've called me to do. I'm just taking steps. And you're leading me. We're going through this journey called life together. And every single step of the way, you're teaching me, you're weeding things out of me, pruning things out of me, putting things in me that I'm gonna need for that next step. What an incredible journey it is when you're journeying with Jesus. I wanna encourage you. Maybe you haven't been in this place. Maybe Jesus hasn't been your number one pursuit. Maybe church hasn't been on your list of priorities. Maybe God's presence has been something that you haven't practiced. You come on Wednesday and you see us worshiping, and that's the only time you get into the presence of God. Can I encourage you to do something this week? When you get into your car tomorrow morning, I want you to say on whatever you're on your way to, if it's school, if it's work, God, I thank you right now that I am alive, that I have breath in my lungs and you have a purpose for me. I thank you that every day with you gets sweeter than the day before. Every day with you is full of purpose. And I thank you that right now, in the place that I'm in, God, I ask you, use me. Use me however you want to. Most dangerous prayer you can pray, because guess what? You'll find out God does hear your prayers and he will answer, because there will be divine appointments everywhere around you. I wonder what would happen when the church stops living like the world does, with no direction and full of discontentment, when we start to actually be content because we're centered on Jesus Christ, the anchor of our souls, who gave his life, who laid it all down so that we could pick up something called our cross, carry it for him everywhere that we go, whether we're in a desirable season or undesirable season. We do it anyways. How can life lack purpose? When we live it in pursuit of the one who purposed us. Can I pray for you tonight?